Everything in life is story. Story is how we share ideas, politics, vision, fantasies, experiences, even our hopes and dreams. The Gipson Gazette is a podcast show devoted to story. Those we consume, those we tell ourselves, and those told to us. Welcome to Miniseries Madness, from soaps to prestige. This is a continuing episode in our continuing series on Gen X nostalgia for the season. And our focus today is on the rise and fall of the 1970s and 80s miniseries, which still exists in a different form. So, just to give us some parameters before we get started, the difference between a mini series and a limited series, which is what we hear today. In the 2010s, for Emmy voting purposes, the Television Academy began referring to any show over 2 hours as a limited series. Still, some networks consider anything less than 4 hours as a mini series, and over 4 hours as a limited series or event series. So that's the parameters. I would actually say that one of the major differences, and it's alluded to in our title, is that the original miniseries in America were one mostly based on novels, a lot of pulp fiction novels, who were bestsellers in their day, and were more soapy in content and they are and less prestige. I think today, when we think of limited series, they are those that are kind of aiming for Emmy consideration. They're pulling out the top actors of the day. They're much more prestige in the writing and in the production values. Um, though I will say, when reviewing the budgets for miniseries in the past, those were some very expensive mofos, which is part of the reason why they stopped doing them. But before we go too much further into today's topic, I am LMG, L. Michael Gibson. I'm the co-host for the Gipson Gazette podcast. I am joined today by Dr. Tracy Salisbury and and my co-host Adrienne Trainer. So why don't y'all say hello, ladies?
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening. Good evening. Looking forward to the discussion.
Yes, as am I. And before we do our deep dive into the mini series era of our youth, our collective youth, are there any stories that are tickling your fancy these days that you want to talk about before we get started?
Well, I know that every what's been. I'm sure we're all in the same submersible. Um,
Really? Is that what we're doing? The
in the,
submersible? Just starting
in the
out with jokes about dead people. All right. All right. I
well,
see where we're going today, people.
I'm only saying it because that has been the dominant story. Um, I think it's certainly in my social media feed. That's what everyone has been talking about. Since since it disappeared, so to speak. And what's really been interesting to me about it is the disparate reactions to what has occurred and the number of people who have taken very strong stances on whether or not it's appropriate to joke about, how much the level of empathy or sympathy they may feel for the individuals who perished on this submersible. Um, it's brought up a lot of discussions of class, a lot of discussions of wealth and what it takes to build the level of wealth that was required to be one of the passengers on this submersible. Um, Questions of safety and what level of responsibility people have for their own choices. And I think that it's been a very interesting microcosm of a lot of you know, it's not so much about those individuals. It's about how people feel about uh, kind of the totality of the expedition in the first place. And I just think all of the discussions that it has raised has been really, really interesting to me. And like I said, seeing the very, very different reactions of people across my social media feed, and then how others have policed those reactions. Um, I think this is just, it's just been a very interesting, lives have been lost. Um, but the sociological discussions that this has raised, I think it tells us a lot about where we differ from each other and kind of where we are at this cultural moment. So
Dr. Salisbury, or Doc Salisbury, as we agreed we would call you for our summer, um, our summer co-host. Uh, could you explain, for the two people in the world who may not have been exposed to this story, what exactly happened, and giving some context for Alt's conversation on this.
Well, the thing is, the question about the Titanic, because I grew up and became a Titanic file or whatever you want to call it, was very fascinated as a child from a unsolved mysteries episode that scared the daylights out of me, where I believe the oldest living survivor, I believe she was 5. She started telling the story about the Titanic and, the great mystery about what happened with the Titanic. So, of course, there's a lot of people that actually love the Titanic. Titanic was found. There was a lot of exploration, really explanation about why the Titanic sank. And then we got into the question of what we do as people, we commercialize things. So there began to be questions when they started bringing up artifacts. Would the Titanic artifacts be sold or auctioned or returned to the family if you can find the family? And of course, the big film James Cameron made uh, $1 billion with the Titanic film. Made Leonardo DiCaprio a major, major international superstar. Um, he has an interest in deep sea exploration, so he's been down to actually visit or view the Titanic multiple times himself. And a company guy who had invented this it's not a submarine, it's a submersible. That's the difference people need to understand. A submarine powers itself. A submersible is something that is just dropped into the water and descends and is kind of guided like I think most people were rather horrified when they described it as a joystick from a video game. Um which really explains how dangerous that is the this situation was the true commercialization of people paying to go visit this site. Not scientists, but lay people. The billionaire and his 19-year-old son that passed away were tourists, fans like me. And so, the descent, I believe, takes either 2 to 4 hours.
Mm.
Um, Most of us don't understand the pressure of when you go down in the water, that the pressure that's on the outside of a container, which is invading the sea, is tremendous. Um, from what I understand, that an hour and 40 minutes or 45 minutes into it, it imploded. So that meant something was wrong with the structure of the submersible, that it could not withstand the sea pressure. Um, um, in some ways, I guess that's the best of the happy ending you can get for this tragedy. The idea of people slowly strangling to death due to the lack of oxygen is horrible. This implosion would have occurred in milliseconds. They wouldn't have even been aware that it happened. So there's something to that. But it's going to be a very interesting scientific thing if you're interested in those kind of nerdy things like I am. I really hope this will end this idea of tourists paying to go do this, which I think it will. It'll be years before they even consider it because they'll have to go through all the lawsuits and the safety commissions and all of that carrying on. Um, but I guess I want to add to what Sister Adrienne said. Um, I don't care if people don't like the jokes. And I don't care if people don't like the criticisms. Because what struck me about it was we put a value on whose life was more valuable than others. You know, if we had had wall to wall press of all of those people that died, I believe it was what, over 300 people that died in Greece, while the
Yes.
Greece authorities watched the ship sink, then maybe you'd have got some sympathy from me. Um, you know, I feel for that 19-year-old who reports are saying he was very intimidated by his father. He was scared to go on this trip, but he went.
Exactly.
I think ain't no way I'd have put my child on there to do that. Not something that you had to sign a thing that says 3 times you could die. Um, I'd have went and told him how it was if I came back. That woman, that the other person I feel major sympathy for is the wife who must be cursing that husband, and there'll be no bodies to bury because they said it's more dangerous to try to retrieve the debris, and the fact that there's debris means there probably isn't much to collect. But I think for Black people in particular, we have always dealt with tragedy and pain with humor. So I wasn't surprised at us joking. Um, but also, I think Black people, when things happen to us, we're heavily critiqued and made fun of. And just because you're wealthy and something bad happens to you, it's the bottom rails on top this time, master. And I don't think people like that. And it's a matter of keeping people in their place. That we're not supposed to make laughs, jokes at wealthy folks, at very brilliant, intelligent folks. But if we remember, this is what happened with the original Titanic. You guys flew too close to the sun and you thought you knew everything, and 1,500 people perished. Um, in 2023, you had the same arrogance, the same casualness. I'm rich, I come first, and it resulted in 5 people dying. Um, that's a lesson not learned. So, this needs to be open to discussion, and it needs to be open to critique and to, um, I guess, satirization. But I don't feel people should be policed on it. You don't police anything else. We're in an age of where we're anti-truth and anti-fact. Um, so it's gonna be hard to police people. But that's my feelings on that.
Yeah, I'm glad you raised the Greek tragedy because that was where I was going to go with this. I mean, but before I go into that, because I do want to provide context for people who may not be familiar with what is happening in Greece. Um, for me, it was just like it's 2.5 square meters of space, and you have to sit Indian style or with your legs folded in order to and be able to hold that position for up to 12 hours was what they were originally told. Um, when they showed the picture of what it looked like inside of it, my claustrophobia alone would have made that impossible for me to be able to do.
Say it louder.
Exactly. Hmm.
Like, I mean, and I think that's what a lot of Black people were responding to, as much as the eat the rich moment we're in right now, right? Like, we're in this very, I mean, collectively beyond just Black folks, even white folks have been putting out movie after movie of eat the rich, from Triangle of Sadness, all there it's a field day right now. It's open season on rich folk. So, the idea of paying $200,000 a piece.
250.
250.
Yeah. Okay. Even more worse, right? $250,000, $250,000 to sit in a something that wasn't even as big as your child's teepee house in your home. like, I mean, I just and then to
8 by
allow that to
6,
go
big 8 by
underwater.
6 feet.
Yeah, and then to put that in underwater, like I mean, black folks was just like, there'd have been a no from me from right from looking at what was going on, even if I had that kind of money. And I also think people were responding to, well, one, black folks and Americans in general, we don't like it when people are a little too smug and they're a little too arrogant. And the interview of the guy talking about risk
Yes.
and kind of essentially saying, if people who aren't risk takers, are essentially trash, right? Like you're not as valuable as folks who take these kinds of risks. And life is all about risk.
Yeah.
And and it
And,
speaks to
and saying, I'm sorry, I just want to say, saying things like, uh, don't leave your house then.
right.
Like, first of all, uh, most of us, as opposed to you, um, we take risks out of necessity. And those risks that we take may be as mundane as just trying to get to work every day and get home from there every day. The implication that you're somehow a coward or have no spirit of adventure. I mean, we can talk about whether or not there's a level of privilege to even the concept of the spirit of adventure uh, and exploration and things like that. But it was so patronizing and so disrespectful, and so uh, divorced from most people's reality, which is once again that's one of the huge that's part of that huge gulf between the very wealthy and the rest of us, in
Yeah.
terms of their worldview. So yeah, he spoke volumes with that interview and said a lot more than he realized he said.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that invites its own aha, look what happened to you. I mean, it just does, right? No matter where you walk and where your walk is in life, it's like, you talked all that shit, nigga, you died.
Yeah. I mean,
like,
let's
so,
let's be
I
real.
mean,
Schadenfreude is a thing for a reason.
right. I
you
mean,
know?
so I wasn't, it wasn't like these were like, sweet, innocent. So, like these are a couple, outside of this post 19-year-old that as you referenced, these are really asshole views. And that does not invite sympathy and empathy when things go wrong for those type of individuals.
If Could
So
I add a little additional perspective I got today, which really, I know I'll feel differently about it as it goes on, but the sister of the billionaire who's he and his son passed, she told the story of, she's the one that revealed he was scared because she was
mhm.
close to him, but she and her brother had kind of had a falling out because she has a severe form of MS. And she and her husband moved to Canada so she could have better access to medicinal marijuana. And the culture and the religion of her family, they were against her using medicinal marijuana.
Mm.
And I thought to myself, so here's this woman who's in tremendous pain, being brave in probably one of the worst diseases you can have. And her family stops talking to her over medicinal marijuana. And this guy puts his 19-year-old son and his billionaire self in a tin can
Can.
and go to the depths of the sea.
Yeah, he takes a literal voyage to the bottom of the sea, or at least attempted to.
And I just thought, wow, you know, you really thought nothing was going to happen to you. You believed in that process. And you got to remember too, this is not rich folks' first rodeo. I mean, because
All right, you're right.
Everest. What? We're 2 years. Was this before the pandemic, where folks were running up to Everest and they were going over dead bodies
Yep.
to get to the top? That even fellow people that had died on the way wasn't enough to stop them. So, you know, at somebody, the jokes write themselves.
Jokes write themselves. I mean, and this also speaks to, here's the reality, which is why most people of color, not just black folks, but a lot of people of color, do not take these kinds of risks, because their everyday existence is a risk, depending on the oppressive systems of government and culture that they're operating in. They don't need to court additional risk. They don't need to seek out and play with, depth defying feats in order to feel alive. And I think that this speaks to a level of boredom. um
It's
Yes.
and
conquering. It's conquering things. Look, if
yeah,
I had $250,000 to play with, I might try to do a film.
right.
I might blow the whole 250,000 trying to make me a film.
Hmm.
I'm not, I do. I love the Titanic. I've watched documentaries. I've bored the hell out of people. This 4-hour documentary is fire on the Titanic. Just watch. It's very fascinating. The class issues, everything. I have been I own entire couple of bookshelves of Titanic books. I own the book on the Titanic menus. They had fabulous food. And the framework, the luxury that went into it. Um, there's no way, even if they had guaranteed me, if the Lord Himself came down and said, "Yeah, you can go down there and you can look at it," I would still say no. I
Yeah,
don't have that. That's a grave site.
Exactly.
a mass
People
grave
died
site
there.
at that.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
And the
let, let,
scariest thing, if you ever look at the pictures, and this is my last comment on this, if you ever look at the pictures, they have photographs when they first found the place of where shoes were laid in place, which means the bodies floated down and, what was left was the shoes. Somebody died there. And so what is your fascination? What is it you can't see on film? Because really you're, it's not like swimming with the dolphins. So, I think it's greedy. It's conquering. It's like being the new thing where they want to go up to space. I'm waiting for Elon Musk to shoot himself off into the air and not come back. And then we can all say, oh, it's so sad. Him and his earplugs went up.
You're funny. I do want to provide context for those who may not be familiar with the Greek story. So, an overcrowded boat with 750 passengers sunk in Greek waters. The boat was attempting to smuggle humans from Libya to Italy in hopes of a better life. Occupants were asked to pay the smugglers between $5,000 to $8,000 for a spot on the boat. Of the 750 passengers, only 104 at last reporting were rescued. 82 bodies, additionally, were recovered. The remaining are still missing and presumed drowned. Nearly 3 dozen individuals have been arrested in connection to this case. And so the fact that, people brought in subject matter experts, and, this dominated the news cycle for 4 days. Meanwhile, this story was reported on, but didn't get anywhere near the kind of mass international coverage, empathy. You know, most people don't even know this thing that even happened, right?
Yes.
Um,
Very true.
and so where we know the intimate details of the father-son relationship of this billionaire and his child. And so it speaks to what stories and people the press has determined is more valuable than others, and what they think we care the most about, and what should dominate our concern and empathy and time. And so I do want to, just have a moment around those lives lost of people who were just trying to get to something better and lost their lives in an attempt not to see something as morbid as a mass gravesite, but to try to have a better life for themselves and their children. So there's that. Switching gears, are there other stories that well, I'll tell one quick story that has come to mind. I found out today. Let me see if I can pull up the details of it. That our dear friends in France are are expecting to launch pilot free. Yeah, here we go. Pilotless flying taxis for the 2024 Olympic Games. So, this is a vision of the Jetsons' dream come true in my lifetime. I have been wanting to see the flying car. And so this is going to be the closest we come to it before I'm too elderly to appreciate the experience. And so I got to ask you both, in 2024, are you willing to catch the Volocopter? Um, Vehicles that are small, pilotless, non polluting flying cabs that can transport two passengers at a time. And that's assuming the European regulators give them a green light. France could be the first company to fly taxis commercially, according to the Daily Beast, and with a limited battery range that lasts under 30 minutes. It may be more proof of concept than an actual rideshare replacement. Still, many in the aviation industry see electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, otherwise known as EVTOLs, as the future of passenger travel. We have hundreds, if not thousands, of EVTOLs by the time you get to 2028. Which one of you lovely ladies are going to be the first to fly these volocopters?
Mm.
Okay, you posted about this, right?
Of course I did.
And I commented on your post. And what I said is that, and I am not, I'll preface this by saying I am not I mean, given the context of what we've just been talking about, but I'm not a hugely risk averse person.
Hmm.
I'm not, for example, afraid of heights in the slightest. And I'm one of those people who, when people post videos of absolutely insane, roller coasters and rides and things like that, and I'm like, oh, I would definitely hop on that thing. But this is a bridge too far for me.
What
Um,
makes it a bridge too far? Y'all,
it's a bridge too
what is
far
the
because
problem?
when they started, when they began to introduce the driverless car, I was like, I think not. And like I said on my in my comment, I'm like, I'm not even crazy about the moving sidewalk at the airport. Because
Maybe.
I need to know that there's oversight. I need to know that there are uh backup plans after backup plans after backup plans. There's all kinds of security, multiple levels of security in place for you to get me to get in a vehicle that's going to leave the earth, not the literal earth, but the but the ground beneath us, with me in it. And there is nobody, to quote Phantasm, there's nobody driving that mother. I don't think so.
What you got for me, Doc Trace?
Look, I'll point to a couple things. When everybody was getting on those little hoverboards, that you have to balance and you just press down and it goes forward. I don't know what they're called. And I
Yeah,
watched
they're hoverboards. That's it.
Mike Tyson bust his ass. And I thought there's not enough Aflac in the world. And the I'm with Adrian, the driverless car, And I love to drive, so this would be a cool idea if it worked. But I'm not one of those people that thinks Elon Musk is as brilliant as he thinks he is.
Oh, absolutely not.
And when I watched that footage of the driverless car that lost control, took over, and started stopping and going in a tunnel and caused all that carnage, I was like, see, y'all, I believe in gremlins, you know, and gremlins are in electronic things. And, you know, I don't want to be the first person who's in that Jetsons mobile the day the gremlins decide, well, they've been enjoying this, let me mess it up.
For me, I actually am looking forward to driverless cars because I don't drive. I don't have a driver's license, which is always shocking to people because they're like, "How did you manage to go through the world?" But for people who know my personal story, I was a street kid by 16, and that's the same age when you're getting your license. So I didn't have that whole experience of your parents taking you out in the car and showing you how to drive. So all of that missed me. And then later, I lived in cities where I didn't need to drive. I was always downtown or in a neighborhood with a lot of different transportation options, where I can get pretty much anywhere I needed to get to within 30 minutes. So it was, just never came a thing. So I'm actually looking forward to driverless cars. But until they can perfect that, I'm certainly not going to get into an air version of that. It's like you can't perfect it on the ground. I don't trust it in the air. So, but I do look forward to the day where we do have driverless cars. I'm not going to be I'm a first adapter for a lot of technology. I'm not a adapter for technologies where my body is put in harm's way. So that's not me. So I wouldn't be one of those first ones, but I will, gladly watch those people get into those first prototypes with fingers crossed and prayers high, praying to the baby Jesus that they make it to their destination within the 30-minute time allotment before the thing runs out of steam.
Ooh, see, that's already a no.
Ah,
The gremlins
And
of
see,
that, no.
you think that driverless cars would be right up my alley because I actually don't enjoy driving. I never have. Um, and, one of the things that defined my relationship with my late best friend was she was the driver. Virtually everywhere we went, she did the majority of the driving, and I only drove under duress. Um, Obviously, I'm in New York and have been for the past 11 years, so I've driven rarely over the last few years. But like when I go back to Texas to visit family and stuff, I drive occasionally there, and of course, I maintain a driver's license. But I don't enjoy driving. It's not. It's not something that gives me some kind of thrill. So you would think that a driverless car would be something that I would really be looking forward to, but no. Not until, well, I don't even know what it would take for me to feel like that was truly perfected, but it definitely not anytime soon.
I look at it like this. I watched a guy when I was in my early 20s. I used to have a restaurant job at in Washington D.C. that had an overnight position, so I would get off work at like 5:30 in the morning, and so uh, I would have to try to catch a cab home at that because that's before the metro starts running again. Metro doesn't start running until like 7 or something like that on the weekends. So I would have to catch a cab to get home, and I would have literally dozens of cabs drive past me because I was a young black man. I'm over six, over 6 feet tall. I'm 6'2", and at that time I was muscular, so they would just go right by me. And so I eventually got into one cab, and the guy got about halfway through my route, got out of the car at a stoplight, did a line of coke on the hood of the car, and then got back in the car
God.
and began. And I sat in the back of that car, saying, "Am I watching what I think I'm watching? Like, is this really happening? Like, is this guy doing coke on the hood of the car?" And I was like, I could get out of this cab, but I'm in the middle of nowhere and I wouldn't be able to make it home. And so I just kind of buckled up and prayed the rest of the way home. And he got me to my destination and was very courteous. Was as I paid him. I didn't mention the Coke. I just wanted to get home. So the reality is that we jump into cabs and have bus drivers and train operators and all kind of human beings doing all kind of things that we have no idea about who are running transportation, and we just place our trust in them,
Yeah.
pilots, you name it. So is the technology that much better? I don't know. I do know is that
Yeah.
we engage in an awful lot of trust all the time with transportation that we're not in control
Yeah, you do have a good point. I mean, I take the subway every day, so
of.
I mean,
Well, we still ain't figured out cruise ships, so you that rocking and rolling, and then that time the power went out on that cruise ship, and it was just basically a floating toilet. No, no. So
Yeah. Well,
yeah,
what's thing for me about the cruise ships, so I do enjoy a good cruise, but there are certain cruise lines I won't um, ever get on again in life. Carnival. So you know, but I don't know. Like, I think the only thing that would now make me a little bit nervous about a cruise ship isn't so much these random acts where they don't work properly. Because I mean, one could say the same thing for planes, trains, and automobiles. It's these now that the whales have figured out how to how to capsize and
I
kill
mean, Orca not
and kill these ships. I don't want to be on the ship that Orca decides she wants to take revenge out on.
she really is decided it's all over for us.
Yes,
Yeah.
they have literally been training each other on how to take out ships. Like, that's a real thing. People look it up if you don't believe me. This is something that's been happening late that has befuddled scientists, but not anybody who has ever watched an episode of Zoo. So
or or saw the film Orca with,
right.
with Richard Harris back in the day, where and it was revenge. It was revenge for uh
Killing its
killing
mate.
I believe it was uh Mother Orca. It was her baby. And she was like, "Look, the ocean is now the streets."
Mhm.
I mean,
Look, and these stories have been
and let's see
escalating
which
because
one of us is gonna win.
I must post at least one animal revenge story a week now. They starting to happen with greater frequency. Sharks showing up where they're not supposed to be. Elephants showing up at people's funerals and stomping them in the ground after they already in the ground. Like,
That's true.
it's getting
Yeah,
out. It's
see,
getting real out
animals
here in these
we
in
think
these
animals
animal
don't talk.
streets.
They out here. These people are out of control. They got Charlie last week.
Hmm.
So mm-mm.
Yeah. So I would ask you, Doc Trace, if you have a story, but we are already like
No. My
45 minutes
story
into
was
the.
with Adrian's. I was part two of the tin can.
Oh, perfect. so, so not the tin can. Y'all are killing me. All right. We're gonna move forward with our focus for today, the mini series. And so part of what inspired this episode is one during the pandemic. I've talked about this a lot. I had went on a serious nostalgia trip, and anything that brought me comfort and joy as a little boy, middle school to high school age little boy, I indulged in, and that, everything from music to comic books. I restarted collecting comics from the era that I grew up in, and miniseries were part of that whole thing. I, as a kid, would love when the TV commercial would come out and they was announced that the next miniseries. I was like, oh my god, I can't wait. It was like an event situation. I did all but pop popcorn to sit in front of the TV for however many hours, for however many days that was going to show off these miniseries. And then, like, during the pandemic, I also went back further because I'm born in '75, so there were a couple of miniseries that were really big in the '70s that I missed. One of them being Rich Man, Poor Man, which I now own and have watched. And um, back door, what the back stairs of the White
At
House,
the
which is
White
kind
House.
of a
Yeah, backstairs at the White
yeah,
House. Yeah.
backstairs of the White House, which was a black miniseries that I had never heard of, from the '70s. And so, I mean, Roots, I think, is the one that everybody knows about. Roots kind of is given credit, even though it's not the first miniseries. That credit is given to the first American miniseries, I should say, because the Brits had been doing miniseries as part of their scheduled television programming a full decade or so before us. So it was only new to Americans. And our first one was called The Blue Knight. It was a 4-hour made for television movie broadcast in 1 hour segments over 4 nights in November of 1973. And it starred William Holden as a Los Angeles beat cop about to retire. And then after that, you started getting more and more of them popping up. Uh, the National Dream, QB7, Rich Man Poor Man, which was a 12 1 hour episodes in 1976 by ABC. But everybody gives credit to Alex Haley's Roots because it was the most successful of all of them. And broadcast television will never see the numbers that it saw that over that period. 71% share of the audience, 130 million viewers, which at the time was the highest rated TV program of all time. And, and it revolutionized television. And after that, miniseries was big business. And so we're talking about the miniseries that we loved, and then kind of what happened to the miniseries, because they were everywhere, these huge big budget extravaganzas, until roughly the mid 90s. And then they kind of faded away. Now, we've had others since then that we would now call the limited series, that are different in tone and tenor than the original miniseries that we're discussing for our nostalgia episode. But things like Band of Brothers and Mayor of East, where these are miniseries in some respect, but have been renamed and reframed as limited series, and are definitely different than the Judith Krantz Scruples or the Sidney Sheldon's If Tomorrow Comes type of miniseries that we saw in the 80s and the 70s. So I want to start by saying, what were your favorites and why? What were your favorite miniseries of this era and why?
Uh, I'll go ahead and start, I guess. So I was very much like you in that I really, really looked forward to miniseries. I don't know what it was about that. I guess the idea of a continuing story, um, self-contained, in that it wasn't a regular TV series, but it gave you additional time for character development. A lot of these, particularly in the 70s, you had mentioned earlier how many of these were based on novels. And a lot of the earlier ones, we got the fun, trashy ones in the 80s, but a lot of the ones in the 70s were kind of these big multi generational family sagas. I'm thinking of stuff like Centennial, or excuse me, even something like like you mentioned, QB7, or The Rebels. Those are some that I remember from when I was very young. Probably way too young to be watching them. Or something like Holocaust, which definitely is the first time that I remember as a child, as a little kid, noticing Meryl Streep and noticing James Woods, because they both had early roles in that miniseries about the Holocaust. And so, those were some of the ones that remembered first, kind of capturing my imagination. In terms of my favorites, because I am, uh, a horror nerd, a lot of them, not that they had a lot of horror themed miniseries, but the ones that they did have obviously were very memorable to me. So Salem's Lot, was an early introduction to Stephen King. It was, you know, in the miniseries format, and it made a powerful impression on me as a child. Also, one that a lot of people don't know about. Also from the late 70s. It's called The Dark Secret of Harvest Home.
Okay,
Um,
it's still
and
my idea.
it, well, it's based on one of my favorite books of all time, which is just called Harvest Home, and it's by a guy named Thomas Tryon, who actually had been an actor, and starred in one of my favorite sci-fi films from back in the day, I Married a Monster from Outer Space.
Oh wow.
And it's great.
I
The
have it.
title the title does I was going to say the title does not begin to there's a lot more going on in that movie than you would guess from the title. But he became a novelist in the 70s, and he wrote a very famous bestseller of the time called The Other,
Mm-hmm.
which was made into an okay film. It's not great, but it's okay.
We can
But they
scrap
made a
over that
miniseries.
later.
Yeah, they made a mini series out of his novel Harvest Home, and it stars the Betty Davis, and an early role for Rosanna Arquette when she was still a teenager, and it tells a very compelling story about a family that moves to a small rural community and finds there's a lot of strange traditions and rituals and odd disappearances and accidents and various things that happen to people in this community. And the husband is his wife gets really immersed in the community and really connected, as does his daughter. Meanwhile, he's trying to find out what exactly is going on in this town. And so I um, loved it, and was just captivated by it. And so, those were some early ones. And then, of course, you got the 80s was the big, decade for these. And as L. Michael mentioned, you had some of the soapier, um, sudsier ones from that time. I remember an early one was Bare Essence. I don't know if you guys remember that one. Um, that starred Jeannie Francis from General Hospital. A kind of it was sort of a family saga about the perfume industry, and was an early kind of soapy miniseries. But and then obviously the darker ones. I mentioned I discussed on an earlier podcast. The Guyana Tragedy, the story of Jim Jones. That was a very powerful viewing experience for me, very influential. Also, Helter Skelter. Um, and so those are just a few of some of the ones that were really, and of course we talking about the sudsy ones, we'll talk about this more later, but Lace.
Of course,
um
yeah, I planned on going there.
yes, I knew you would, so I'm just
Yes,
saying. Our whole I think I was in the 8th grade when Lace aired, and I think the whole 8th grade, even the boys who tried to act like they were not interested in stuff like that, I think my entire grade was glued to the TV for Lace. So
and Doc Trace, what you got?
I'm gonna have to reboot a little bit. Somebody ran off with all of my stuff under their arm. That's all
so
right. That's
sorry,
all
Doc
right. That's
Tracy.
all right. That's all right. Um, you know, I'm gonna say, well, in my household, miniseries was a way for me to get to stay up late
Mm,
because kind of after Roots and we were a PBS household. So, if you could sit and be quiet, you would be allowed to stay and watch it. And if you weren't keeling over, falling asleep during the episode, or being mischievous during the episode, then you would be allowed to stay up the next night or the next time it came on to watch it. So I love TV and I love staying up. And so I took full advantage. And vividly, and what's interesting, there was a miniseries called The Forsyth Saga. And my sister is named after the lead character, Fleur. It's where my mom got
Oh,
the name
okay.
from. And so that was kind of how we started that. And for me, watching miniseries, the early ones, number one, I'm gonna say my boy Richard Chamberlain, who I just thought was the cutest thing ever, and had no idea he was the queerest thing ever. But I love The Man in the Iron Mask. Um, that was amazing. I really could get away with something too that I had read it, and I was like, but it's educational. And that usually would get my dad, because number one, he was a TV nut, so he liked to have company anyway. But The Man in the Iron Mask was one that really stood out. Um, I Claudius. Oh my goodness.
Listen.
Wow. I fell in love with
Listen.
Cyan Phillips, and I wanted to know everything she ever made. I had no idea she was a megastar, because she was older in this, but she was so evil. And so whenever I think of, like, Cersei, some of these very evil women, I go, "Ooh, you have nothing on Cyan Phillips and I Claudius." And there was one, and it scared the hell out of me. It was called Chiefs, and it was about generations of police chiefs in the Deep South. And Danny Glover is in it. And I remember watching the previews because I watched it because Brad Davis was in it. Um, and he played the most racist, violent chief. He was so racist that the white people were like, "Oh, he's got to go." Um, and it was very striking and very violent for the time. I want to say it's 1980, 1981, maybe. But that was very visual. Um, and um, don't know if you guys remember Sophisticated Gents.
Oh yeah.
That was a two-parter, I think. Um, which was very fascinating to me because I think that was one of the first times I remember kind of this inner fascination of black men's lives and someone being queer um in it. And I thought, ooh. And so that was very powerful to me. And um my all-time favorite is Shogun. Um because it just starts off like, oh, it's different. When Richard Chamberlain gets up there and he's trash talking the Japanese, and and how dare you, and blah blah blah, and they throw him on the ground and the guy urinates on him. I was like, oh my god, white people are getting it in this. Disrespectful. Bet you watch your mouth. I bet you take a bath now. I was like, oh my, being a kid from South Central, it's like Japan. And and I was a book nerd, so my fascination spots of my childhood were Australia and Japan. I haven't been to Japan yet, but I've been to Australia, and I became fascinated with Japanese culture after that. And so that was amazing. And then one that has stuck with me, and actually, I don't know if you guys have this, a relaxation series. Like, if you're just have had a week or had a moment or something that was driving you bananas and you just didn't have anything left, but you could sit and put this series on and it kind of calmed you. And it's Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy with Alec Guinness. I think I've got like 4 copies.
Oh, wow.
And I can watch
Yeah.
that. It's not a mystery, but I will still act shocked that when they reveal who the spy is. I'll be like, oh, I can't believe, and but that really relaxes me and fascinates me and works my mind. And Alec Guinness is just it's a master class in acting, and everybody is so brilliant. And I love Ian Richardson. And then I would say my last one would be um one of the few, probably the first police procedural miniseries, and it scared me. And like when they talk about it, and it's Salem Slot and all of that. Jack the Ripper. There was a British police procedural. I think it was 3 episodes or 4 episodes, and it was about who was Jack the Ripper. And if you had never heard of Jack the Ripper, which I hadn't as a little kid, I was like, "Is he still running around?" Because you don't put the dates in the context, but they were going in all this graphic detail about the murders, and it was in a courtroom like Law and Order, and they had chalkboards, and they were arguing and debating and shouting, and I was just like, "Oh my God, Jack the Ripper is still out there!" And see, and I'm a little bit older than you two, so this was during the 70s when the great serial killers of ever, the golden age of serial killers, was occurring in California. So it was the Hillside Strangler and John Wayne Gacy and the Manson killing. So I was all like, "Oh my God, they can trap these people." And and my mom, it was too late, but she was just like, "She shouldn't be watching that." But it was too late by then. But that, yeah, that one, Jack the Ripper, you can't find it. It's very rare to find, and Chiefs is very hard to find, and so is The Dark Secret of Harvest Home. It is very hard to find. There's a ratty copy on YouTube,
Yes.
and I don't, and there's short and truncated versions on DVD that are not the whole series. I don't know what happened, but that will probably never be on DVD.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to. Something happened to the rights. They don't have. No one seems to have a full cut of it. It's miserable because, um, you can see what should have been. What had to have been there when it originally aired,
Yeah,
but you can't get it back. There's gaps.
but I have this nostalgia for them. I think the acting, something El Michael said at the beginning, um, it was the brilliance of the casting, and you knew these actors wanted to do these things. It's not how it is now, where it's like, "Oh, I'm going to do television, but it's only prestigious, limited series television." Um, it was the part, and you know, it was the passion behind it. Um, and as far as the trashy stuff, I think it was the Thornbirds, and then it was North and South for me because I always liked the Southern bodice rippers. You know, "You gave me your favors, lady." It was all like, "Girl, you done messed up now. You done dropped your drawers. He gonna tell everybody." You know, and then the forbidden love. The Confederate soldier with the black slave. It was just stuff like that that I was like, "Oh God," because I remember we read those books coming home from the bus. We were bused to school, and I had a buddy whose mom just did not watch what she read at all. I thought, okay, I'm reading these serial killer books and scary books, and she was reading every nasty romance bodice ripper, and she would bring them in her bags and distribute them on the bus, and we would read until we got to the destination, and she'd bring it the next day, and then you'd finish up the book, and we'd rotate them around. But they were all these, he was the slave master and she was the slave. So when North
Oh
and
my.
South came out, and I was just gone. So yeah, those were my ones.
Hell, y'all, I mean, talk about stealing all of the good stuff. Though I will say, y'all are way more highbrow than I am. Your choices, you went all the way back to the Forsyth Saga which was actually in the late 1960s out of the BBC, and it was broadcast over in America, later, because it wasn't one of those American broadcasts initially, and then they've remade it at least two more times, I think, since
Well,
then.
I didn't say I liked it. I said that's how I got started.
Oh yeah,
Just the fact that I
yeah.
actually sat through the Forsyth Saga with my mother is how I got away with getting to watch things that I was more interested in, like Rich Man, Poor Man, which she thought was extremely racy and way too much for me to be watching. But I had been her buddy watching the Forsyth Saga, so she kind of let it slide.
Well, it's so funny that Irwin Shaw's novel Rich Man Poor Man, for those who may not be familiar with this one, is a 12-hour adaptation. It launched the career of Nick Nolte as a star. Which is the other thing that was interesting about these miniseries, is that as much as they had a lot of the Hollywood old guard from the studio system era play grandparents and parents and elders in these miniseries, giving them kind of a little extra glam, right? Like that you got to see the MGM and the Warner Brothers stars from yesteryear continuing to get work in much of the way that the Irwin Allen disaster films were kind of these 20 people all-star cast. Half of them, the miniseries almost borrowed from that, right? I think the miniseries borrows from kind of the disaster films of let's stack it with as many stars as possible, even if they only have
Yeah.
like one scene and three lines. We're able to say that they're in it. And but they also borrow heavily, at least the trashier ones borrow heavily from women's films from the 1940s, and I mean, maybe even a little bit in the 50s. The 50s a little bit more conformist, but whereas the women's films of the 30s and 40s are a little bit more progressive, where they were about these women in power, right? They centered women. These were women's stories. They were oftentimes based on novels by women writers like Judith Krantz, Jackie Collins, Barbara Taylor Bradford. They took women seriously. Women were oftentimes in positions of power and had to fight in order to keep their power. And so the stories were about the rise of this woman who was underestimated or poor or raped or foreign or some kind of obstacle that she had to overcome before she was the most glamorous, most richest, most successful woman in the world. Right, like was the storyline over and over, which borrows heavily from those women's films of the 30s and 40s in that regard too. But of course there was always these men who were either their undoing or these men who were their saviors, which also kind of echoes back to those kind of films. The other thing, like I said, going back to the idea that these films were making stars, you get a Patrick Swayze out of North and South. That I don't know that Patrick Swayze was considered the household name he would be after that. Because this is pre Ghost, pre Roadhouse, and all of those kind of movies that were successful. North and South made Patrick Swayze a star, and similarly, Richard Chamberlain, who had been successful prior to Shogun and Thornbirds on Broadway, but these definitely elevated his profile considerably and made him a household name, which couldn't have been helpful when he was trying to stay closeted. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think for me, the trashier ones were the ones that I appreciated. One, because they took me, I wanted to be anywhere but the south side of Chicago in the hood, right? Like, and so the novels that created these miniseries for me all took me to these wonderful locations all around the world. And the miniseries did the same things. They were international. They would be in Paris. They would be in Germany. They would be in London. They would be in Milan, right? Like, so you had all of this at kind of the excesses of the 80s glam being portrayed in these stories. And they were always international. And I would learn things like Taittinger champagne, like, as a 12-year-old who wasn't going to be anywhere near Taittinger champagne. Right. 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 But, similar to, I mean, I think for other people to kind of give contextualize this who weren't there in this era, you had at the same time as these miniseries, Notch Landing, Dynasty, The Colbys, Falcon Crest happening at nighttime, and they were like the box office or ratings bonanzas for their networks. You also had Robin Leach's Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous, glorifying the excesses of the 80s, which were kind of similar to what would later be maybe in a more hoodish way, Cribs. and, other, and maybe to some extent the Real Housewives series, right, which is about like showing off how people live with a little bit more means than you. And so these miniseries that were successful in that period, that were the ones that I loved the most were, the Sidney Sheldon ones, the Jackie Collins, Hollywood Husbands, Hollywood Wives, Lucky Chances, even though I will forever eschew the casting of Nicolette Sheridan as Lucky Santangelo. This is, even in a bad brown and a bad brunette
My
wig.
first hot white girl.
I like Nicolette Sheridan. She's
Oof.
wonderful in Desperate Housewives, but she ain't nobody's Italian.
No,
Right?
she's not.
I know that's right.
No, she's not, but she was beautiful.
Yeah. But I bought the box sets for Judith Krantz, and you get I'll Take Manhattan and Scruples, the Barbara Taylor Baffert's A Woman of Substance, Joan Collins Sins, and Monaco. I mean, and these are production companies that oftentimes these women would have themselves with their husbands, and so they're making money both as as writers, or sometimes the stars or the producers. And so yeah, those were the ones that were exciting to me. Obviously, North and South. I think it was the first time as a kid I watched The Tragic Mulatto Story.
Oh
Um,
gosh.
I don't know that I had seen that trope before then. I mean, I would go on to see it, frequently in earlier movies like Member of the Wedding and Pinky and Imitation
Pinky.
of Life. But all of the imitations of life. But outside of the
What was
trashy
the
ones,
maid's name in Member of the Wedding?
oh god, I just know
Because all I
it's
remember
Esther.
is that scene where he goes, "You got a nickel and a dime."
I just know it's Ethel Waters plays the
Yeah,
the.
at the Waters. Miss Angie,
Mhm.
you got a nickel and a dime.
Right. But yeah, I think that so all of those were kind of exciting. Lace, obviously, Which One of You Bitches Is My Mother, which I think we've now said at least on 3 different podcast shows in this of this season, was just thrilling. And even though Lace 2 wasn't as good as the first one, where the Lace 2 the porn star turned legit actress is looking for her father, and the first one she's looking for her mother. But Lace is a classic example of what I mean. Like, they're in a boarding school over in France or or Switzerland or something like that, and then when you go into each woman's lives later on, they're in different international locations and having all of them are having soap opera dramas as experiences. Um, and Phoebe Cates, who might have been a name from Fast Times at Ridgemont High prior to this, certainly had her star elevated after doing Lace and Lace 2. Um, Gremlins probably being what she's most known for. But yeah, I think in terms of faves, obviously those were all faves, but faves that also stand out that we haven't touched on yet, miraculously, uh, have been V, which as a kid was the most exciting thing in the whole wide world was to see V and the aliens come and eat rats and mice, and and they would show their mouths extended to watch them eat the things, and I was like, how did they do that? How did they pull that off? And as a kid I was just obsessed with V before it was a TV show. It was a miniseries. And the other.
Listen, I'm
Huh?
sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I just have to say I watch V and V the Final Battle every year. It's just annual viewing for me.
I have the
Uh,
box set that I
I
don't think
I
they
have
hold up.
I have a box set too.
Yeah, I don't know that they hold up though. I mean,
I think
the
I think
miniseries
V
better than the TV show.
no, not the TV show. I don't do the TV. No, I'm talking about the original V miniseries and then the
Yes,
sequel, the miniseries sequel to that, which is the Final Battle.
right. Yeah,
Those,
those hold up better than this TV show.
yes,
I agree.
yes, those two. I mean, even with the dodgy '80s special effects, um, and then even with the fact that I, like I said, not trying to not trying to pull focus from you at all, but it's just because I've been reading some articles. It's in what is it, the 30, it's an anniversary for V. Um, what is it, the 30th anniversary?
I would think probably closer to the 40th.
40th maybe, because
Yeah,
V came out in what, 80,
83 or 84.
83. Okay.
Hmm.
Yeah, so there's actually been quite a few articles about it recently, and especially because of, you know uh QAnon parallels, believe
Oh,
it or
Jesus
not.
Christ. About lizard
Exactly.
people. Oh,
Yes,
gee.
yes.
Um,
Yeah.
for people who don't
The
know, V was a alien invasion story, then which they were lizard people underneath their human skin, and that they could look like us, but if you ripped or cut them or ripped them in any way, you would be able to see that there was lizard underneath,
Yeah,
which is now a
and
QAnon conspiracy theory about who
exactly. I
runs
mean,
them.
the whole idea about the reptilian, people, secret reptilians, that's actually an old trope that's way older than QAnon, but QAnon has given it new life. And I had read an interview recently with the writer and director of V, Kenneth Johnson, who was talking about how he constantly gets mail from like QAnon followers, talking about how V was, uh, you know, basically like predicted this, or it was like
Hmm.
a secret, it was like a coded message, that this whole thing was real and everything. But yeah, so it still has a great deal of resonance today, sadly. I mean, obviously,
For
you can
all the
look at
wrong
it
reasons.
for all the wrong reasons. You can look at it from different perspectives, but yeah, I mean, I just had to piggyback on you to say, yeah, V. It was I just hadn't I just hadn't gotten to V yet because it was all about that.
Yeah,
So
V. I mean,
yeah,
V was a huge, massive television event at the time. I remember it was like on the news, and they would show the different special effects, which were revolutionary at the time for television. And they were practical effects, so that made them probably even better, in this world of CGI we live in now. The other miniseries that we haven't talked about yet, which I do also believe is a landmark miniseries, and it doesn't fit the kind of trashy international, caviar. What was it? Life, champagne, dreams, and caviar. The what was this? The Lifestyles was a famous thing.
With champagne
Something.
uh,
dreams and caviar hopes.
That's what. Yeah,
no, I think it was I
champagne
actually think
hopes and caviar dreams.
champagne wishes and caviar
That
Champagne
was
dreams.
wishes.
it.
Yep.
Yeah, champagne wishes and caviar dreams, right? So of most of the bulk of these types of very popular and successful and expensive, I mean, which is leading to the decline, um, very expensive miniseries was The Women of Brewster Place,
Yeah.
which black folks quote as much as they quoted The Color Purple, right? Which stars Oprah Winfrey, who also produced it, Jackie Harry, Loretta Devine, not Loretta Devine, God, sister from who played Josephine Baker,
Lynn Whitfield.
Lynn Whitfield, thank you, um, and Olivia Cole, God bless her soul.
Yep.
Um, may she rest in peace.
Yeah.
And
It
just
was also
Paula
in
Kelly,
Yep.
huh?
sorry, I was just going to say Olivia Cole was also in one of those 70s miniseries we mentioned earlier,
The
Backstairs.
Backstairs, yeah. Backstairs of the White House, yes. She, and there weren't a lot of black ones, right? Even though we have Roots and Roots the Next Generation and Roots the Gift. Um, for the most part, the miniseries are mostly white, like, and for most of this kind of 70s and 80s era, which is interesting when you think about the most successful one being Roots, out of all of them. Uh, you know, um, but the Winter
But
Brewster Place also. Go ahead.
the funny thing about the 70s is there actually were a few more, I think, more in the 70s than there were in the 80s, because Backstairs at the White House is really, I mean, it's a large interracial cast, but it's really the story of the black domestic servants in the White House,
Hmm.
and their relationship with various iterations of presidential families. And then you had actually a woman called Moses
Yes.
from that time period, which was also a miniseries about Harriet Tubman. Because Cicely Tyson was busy in the '70s in these miniseries. Okay,
The way,
uh,
yeah, because he also did the Marva Collins story in the 80s.
yeah.
Mhm.
And that you had the King miniseries with Paul Winfield playing MLK.
Hmm.
That was in the '70s. And there was one that I remembered, and I wasn't sure if it was really real. I was like, did I really see this? And was it a TV movie or was it a miniseries? I remembered it being a miniseries, but I wasn't even sure if it was real because it seemed, the more I thought about it, the more ridiculous it seemed to me.
Which
So
was.
I had to look it up to make sure that I was not crazy. And it was a miniseries called Freedom Road,
Yep.
Hmm.
which starred Muhammad
Ali.
Ali
Yep.
and Chris Christopherson.
Yep.
And I was like, Muhammad Ali, if I remember correctly, he's playing um Gideon, what is his last name? He's playing a real life person, a formerly enslaved man who was a Union soldier and actually became a senator. I believe his name was Gideon Jenkins. Um, and uh, and Chris Christopherson is supposed to be some kind of, he's like a sharecropper or a tenant farmer or something who sort of works with him to kind of unite. This is all, the story takes place primarily during Reconstruction,
Hmm.
and he's working with him to try to unite white tenant farmers with, with black former slaves, to try to amass political power. And of course, their movement is stomped out by the violent response to Reconstruction. But um, like I said, I wasn't even sure if I really remembered that. It was in the back of my mind, and I thought maybe I dreamed that. Maybe that wasn't a real miniseries, but it was. And so it seems like maybe particularly because of what you've talked about the kind of soapy turn that the miniseries really started to take in the '80s, and it really began to focus on sort of
Pulp Fiction novels.
yes, yeah, the kind of the, like you said, the Judith Kranzes and the maybe the Danielle
Sidney
Steele
Sheldon's.
and Sidney Sheldons and all of that. And it was about aspirational um it was in a way they were very forward thinking and very feminist because they did often center around women, but they were, as you said, they were very white. And so the
Hmm.
I think the genre itself grew, as it got bigger, and expanded and started to pull less from historical novels and family sagas and more from a different, more popular fiction, airport fiction, if you will. um, that some of those stories that really had actually centered black folks in the '70s, that stuff went away, because these were contemporary stories, or forward reaching stories, not so much. And of course the black people couldn't really be in contemporary times, apparently. They had to go back to history and do King and Harriet Tubman and that kind of thing. So
Though interestingly enough, I mean, after Women of Brewster Plays in the '90s, there was kind of a little bit of a resurgence. You had things like The Wedding. You had Queen, which was wedding based on a Dorothy West novel from the Harlem Renaissance. Um, you had Halle Berry's tragic turn in Queenie or Queen.
woo, woo.
You had, but you also had her do a better turn in Their Eyes Are Watching God, which I actually enjoyed. But so there was kind of like a resurgence of more, Mama Flora's Family. There's kind of like a resurgence in the '90s, just similar to the '70s, right? Like, so in the '70s we had black exploitation films dominating the '70s. In the '90s we had a resurgence of black films that were romantic comedies, kind of come back to the fore. And so you also then get the return of the black miniseries. um But yeah, but you're right. Outside of kind of the occasional Cicely Tyson turn in the '80s with things like Marva Collins, you don't really have a lot. But the Women of Brewster Place, I do feel like is one of those that stands out as one of the best of the era.
Oh yes.
It also depicted, I think for the first time on television, Black lesbianism,
Mhm.
and took it
In a very
seriously.
vague way.
Uh,
Vague.
was it? I don't know.
Yeah,
I
it
mean, I
was
feel like
vague.
it wasn't vague to me, and I was a
Well,
kid.
you can understand what it was, but it was none of the language was used. It was just
Are you gonna make me do Olivia Cole's speech again?
I'm just
Oh my
saying.
God.
Look, I have to
I
be honest. I
saw
do
you.
not.
You forgot to close your shades
Right.
last night.
Yeah.
Standing there naked, calling to the other one to bring you a towel. I saw you. I saw you. I saw you. I saw you. Baby, please don't give me
Oh,
that. I don't know. That did not feel vague at all to me. It
look,
was
that was
very clear what they were saying about this. And then there's Paula Kelly's epic speech to Lynette McKee. Who are
yes.
the theys? It was the theys that drove us from Linden Hills. It was the theys. And here we are in Brewster Place, and you still going on about the theys. So,
Well, I mean, it's all the pain, none of the love.
well, that's true. But I mean, but
Yeah.
that's true for everybody in the story. Like, I don't know, nobody in Women of Brewster. I mean, Gloria Naylor, who was my favorite writer for years before I fell back in love with Toni Morrison, did not believe in happy endings for anyone. Like, she didn't believe in joy that was long term.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of the book or the miniseries. It's just unlikable to me. But that doesn't mean it's not good. It's just
Yeah, I mean, she wrote Bailey's Cafe, which is still the first time I ever had to close a book because it was so viscerally painful that I lost my breath. Like, yeah, I mean, that was Gloria Naylor's work as a writer.
and if I'm
But
honest, I can't remember the name of it. But the first time I ever saw one, what got me with the trashy ones was revenge. I like revenge. That people you're gonna get it, and it allowed women to have revenge. And
mhm,
I remember seeing the British version, the TV version of Widows,
mm,
which was pretty darn good. But the one I can't remember the name of it. It's an Australian one where her husband throws her to the crocodile,
Oh my gosh.
and she
Are
gets
you serious?
yes, and she
Please.
fights off these crocodiles, but he thinks she died, and basically the police report her as dead. But she gets rescued, and she gets plastic surgery, and she
I
goes on, and then she comes back, and it's on.
I cannot believe that you do not remember the name of
I
it
can never remember the name of
because
it.
because that made such an impression on me. I was
Yes,
fascinated by that. I was glued to the TV, and I cannot remember the name of it either.
I want to. I've got to remember the name of it because I've been trying to look it up to find it, and but
And
oh my god,
I hadn't thought about it in forever until just now when you brought it up. But it was, I mean, and L. Michael, if you have not seen it, we got to figure out the name of it because this is right up your alley. I
no, it
mean,
sounds
it's
oh
like
no,
on
something
everywhere.
I've seen, and I want to say it's like a Sidney Sheldon book, but I can't remember. Yeah.
El Michael, it's like, when you knew there was revenge, when the woman was coming back to get revenge, they always had the fancy hat tipped to the side,
Oh yeah.
and they was coming back, and they was gonna be standing there like, oh, girl couldn't pull it off in P Valley, but it's like when she came in to buy the strip club, you
Right.
know,
Right.
it's like that. But yeah, that one, it made such an impression on me because I remember when she came back and she had this amazing plastic surgery and she looked so different, and and she was just, y'all were gonna get it. Everybody that did her wrong.
Child, I just found it.
What is it?
Return to Eden.
Return to Eden. Yes. Is that Rebecca Gibney?
Yes,
Okay,
Rebecca.
that's what
Yes,
made her a
Rebecca Gillen.
star.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And
Return to
it was that, and was that because Return to Eden is also a name of an Anne Rice book, but that's not the same
Oh
book.
no,
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 you know, I know the Anne Rice book is all about S&M.
Woo!
But
No, that's
but Return to
no,
Eden, who
that's
was the
Exit to
author?
Eden.
Huh?
The Anne Rice's Exit to Eden.
Exit
Okay.
to Eden. No, but there's a Return to Eden too. There's a
Oh,
whole
is there?
series.
Okay.
Yeah, there's like a whole series. That whole Eden thing wasn't just one book.
Yeah, I was gonna say. I think I read her. I read the Sleeping Beauty series, but I only read Exit to Eden, and that was the end of that particular side.
uh, as
Side of you
as
know.
a young person, I was enthralled to learn about those things. It was a naughty, very naughty book. People, it was
Yeah.
50 Shades of Grey way before 50 Shades of Grey was a thing.
Right.
Um, so let's talk about. I mean, because we've covered a lot of ground here. Some of the bigger ones we've kind of not touched on, which is the Centennial NBC's 1978 miniseries, was 25 hours long, only to be bested by the miniseries that ended it all, which was War and Remembrance, the sequel to The Winds of War. The Winds of War was a hit for ABC in 1983. War and Remembrance decided to go 30 hours. It was the longest miniseries to date. And, by 1988 to 1989, when it aired, a lot had changed in the landscape. One of the big reasons why War and Remembrance, with its huge budget, I think it was like $30 million or something like that at the time. And, to give it some comparison, I think like Sins by Joan Collins was maybe like 15 million in the same era. So it's like double the size. Um, but but it was, the things had changed, and one of the things that had changed was cable had come to prominence by the end of the 1980s. When the 80s started, very few people had cable and HBO. I think so. Here's the statistics: only 8% of American households received basic cable by 1970. By 1980, that number had climbed to 23%. By the end of the decade, when Winds of War aired, nearly 60% of the homes had basic cable. And and like in the late 1970s, 90% of the primetime viewing audiences was tuned into ABC, CBS, or NBC. By 1989, that number was down to 67% and would fall steadily throughout the remaining years of the century. So we know that, people just have way more options. Similar to now, right? We have way more options that are taking our eyeballs away. And these miniseries, unlike a TV series, um, they would have to be paid upfront by the studios, the production costs. Whereas with a regular TV show, they could just fund a pilot, sell the pilot at the upfronts, and then take the money from the upfronts, to finance the rest of the season. So these were huge financial risks for the studios that, over time became not the sure thing, the surefire bets that they had been for, 20 years, or, roughly 15 years. So by the 1990s, you saw much less of them. They were still some airing, but they didn't have the prestige or the promotions or the publicity that you saw kind of with North and South. I mean, I remember North and South, they were announcing it almost like a movie, like 6 months in advance with trailers that were running way before the actual series. So by the time North and South actually aired, everybody and their mother was tuned into that, black and white. So I think so that's one of the things that killed the miniseries, though, we talk about it as having fallen, but, as I mentioned earlier, that it never really went away. You would still have things like Mama's Flora's Family, you would still have Band of Brothers, um, and, it definitely took a turn. So, what are your thoughts on, the miniseries taking a turn from kind of pulp fiction, trashy fiction, fun, um, to very buttoned up Emmy bait prestige shows that are trying to give awards?
Well, one thing I'll say too is that one of the things that killed the, or not killed it, but killed it from being a go-to thing was I think they stayed too long at the fair with some of the old stars that they thought was prestige, and
Mm.
you had nighttime soaps with some very hot men. You had Flamingo Road, you had Falcon Crest, and you had storylines and things that were because I can remember on Falcon Crest where bitch was used on television for the first time.
Hmm.
And we were just scandalized in the dorm room, like, oh, but she called her a bitch. What? And those throwback miniseries were using the old fashioned directors and writers, and I think they basically got washed over by time. And but remember, miniseries kind of allowed Stephen King to come to the screen because he wrote his books were so considered long and hard to film that that was where he ended up was television. Because you get Salem's Lot, you get It, you get The Shining, miniseries. It
And
did
really,
all
for a
the
while, he was the main miniseries person for the '90s
right.
for like
Yeah,
event picks.
And I thought
definitely.
for a while too, the other medium, I think the medium got darker, which is why we don't remember it the same as the trashy films, because that was sort of a family affair. Everybody in some way or another is going to either sneak and watch the Thornbirds or Lace or a Woman of Influence. But I think when they started making like Fatal Vision and Blind Faith, back
Hmm.
back 2 nights,
Yes.
was this salacious, these murdering men, the woman done wrong. That was those were miniseries too. We just don't kind of remember them. But I remember Fatal Vision was kind of spooky. Because I was looking at that dude, like when he sued over that miniseries, I was like, yeah, you should have, because that convinced the world you was guilty as hell. And what's her name? Rachel Ward did tons of them.
Hmm.
That one where they against the sea or in the sea where they murdered that couple and uh basically threw them overboard. I was like, oh God, yeah, the true crime ones became something because the Hillside Strangler had one, and the um uh Ted Bundy. I remember that was kind of scary. The Ted Bundy when a stranger beside me. Ooh, you know, uh,
That one was the deliberate stranger
The
with
Deliberate
Mark Harmon.
Stranger.
I've seen that many, many
Yeah, I watched
times.
that one many, many times because I keep going. Y'all like that NCIS dude, but he was Ted Bundy.
No,
Yeah.
so I mean, so are we? Is it? Are we just? Is it just that the phrase miniseries is tainted, and that's why we have decided to go with event series and limited series? But it's really just more or less the same, or is there really something different about the limited series that we watch today versus the ones that were so popular in the '80s and the '70s?
Now, let me ask though, but don't the Emmys still have a miniseries or movie category? I think there just weren't enough miniseries to have their own category individually, but I think they still,
They merged them,
I
so
think
it's a
they have that
TV.
merge.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they merged them, but they do separate limited series
right.
from the. So
From
it's
from any,
original TV, movie, or miniseries as one category, and then limited series as a separate category, and that's where you
right.
see the more Mayor of East Town and
Yeah, or
you
Bi-
know
um, Big Little Lies
Big
and
Little Lies, Sharper
okay,
Objects,
yeah.
Ooh,
anything
child.
smart.
Yeah. Ooh, Sharp Objects. I really like Sharp Objects. I actually like the miniseries of Sharp Objects a heck a lot better than the book.
Oh, I
Uh,
loved the book.
I love the book, but that
I
was one of
loved
those
the
that
book.
I was kind of like, oh God, she's getting on my nerves. And then I reread the book and I was like, oh, she got on my nerves in this book.
Big Little Lies was one where I read because I don't really read a lot of Pulp Fiction anymore, but I did enjoy that book. I remember Audible like recommended it to me or something, and so I went ahead and listened to it. And I thought they did a really good job of capturing and maybe even bettering the book in the TV version.
Well, now I
But
want more of Mayor of Easttown, so I'm gonna keep praying on that. But I thought that was one of the most powerful. I think it's what you said at the beginning. British actors don't care what you call it, but American actors needed to be called limited series for it to sound more prestigious than like somehow you're not doing television.
right.
Um, which I think is ridiculous. It's a mini series. That's exactly what it is. Just because you added 4 more episodes and you made it 8 or 10 doesn't make it different. Because the Brits never stopped making them. If you really look at it, the Brits never stopped making
No, they
mini series.
preceded us in developing them from the beginning, and then they kept on making them.
Right. Because it's
Yeah.
Tom Hardy's The Take is I really enjoy, and the little guy that plays Endeavor. Um, you know and that's based on one of their salacious pulp writers that writes those big thick books you have on the tube.
Mhm.
So, and because I to me, limited series and mini series I think has a deeper meaning. Like, okay, Midnight Mass is considered a mini limited series, but it doesn't feel the same way as Queen's Gambit. So, I think limited series is a mixed term.
Yeah, I mean, I think when I think limited series, I think a prestige director, right? So I think it's not even just about you get these, you can get a Meryl Streep or a Nicole Kidman to join in on the fun, but you also are going to get directors who might not have been willing to do television 20 years ago, right? Right. But are willing to do it for an HBO. Well, when we had
Mhm.
HBO, I don't know if they're gonna do it for Max.
You're right.
Right? Because HBO was the king for many, many years of the prestige miniseries,
Yeah.
with Mildred Pierce and, like you get a Kate Winslet. Kate Winslet probably is maybe might be the new quiet queen of miniseries that are really well done, because Mildred Pierce was really well done. And that was a Kate Winslet vehicle, as was Mayor of Easttown. Um, so yeah, I
And
think that
what was the one with there was one with oh, it's just not coming to me right now. There was one with Frances McDormand. Um
Olive Kitteridge.
yes, that yeah,
Hmm.
Olive Kitteridge, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so you're getting Oscar level stars, you're getting Oscar level directors and cinematographers. I mean, I will say that the look and feel of limited series is like going to a movie, like an art house film,
Yeah.
as opposed to whereas the 80s and 70s stuff was very television. Like it was
Mhm.
clearly television.
Yes.
Even when
Everything
they
was
would
on
be
the yacht,
overseas.
the yacht dock, because they weren't taking the ship out. Yeah.
Right. I mean, even when they would do these international places, it'd be like a gorgeous opening shot of a vista or of the hotel's cover.
Or the
Then you
Eiffel
could,
Tower, and
right,
then
and then there was interior shots for the rest of
right, with
Right.
people
you
wearing
know,
berets. Yeah.
exactly.
Well, and even with the casting, what you're talking about now about how you frequently will have for a limited series, you know, award-winning actors who are known mostly for film, and they have more opportunities now. And the way that television, this whole idea of prestige television, has made it a more palatable environment for an actor to be willing to play in, and have an opportunity, particularly older actresses who find themselves not having as many options in film. Um, I think the miniseries of the 70s and the 80s, obviously, that line of demarcation between TV actor and film actor was much sharper at that time. And so you had, as you mentioned, LMG, the kind of golden age Hollywood stars, um, lending some, kind of lending some glamour to the proceedings, but their roles weren't often, that big. I mean, you had sometimes they were just kind of there for seasoning, so to speak. I mean, a lot of times you might have a major like Barbara I believe it's Barbara Stanwyck who's in
The
the Thornbird.
Thornbirds, yes, playing
Right.
the first cougar, the
Yes.
original cougar.
Yes.
But she was
You
looking
know,
good doing it.
yes, he
Dang.
did. He did.
Yes,
In her
yes.
queer
So
self.
sometimes you have that, but I think a lot of I'm thinking particularly LMG about some of the ones you were talking about that were sort of uh, these stories of women and women in positions of power or rising to positions of power, and how many times the actresses who were in these miniseries, they were actresses who had been previously on a TV show,
Had
and
been
the
previously been
TV
on a TV
show had,
show and had been stars in that TV
right,
show.
stars of a TV show, and that
And
TV show had ended,
yes,
and these miniseries gave them opportunities to extend their careers and to move into,
absolutely.
movies. So you had a Lindsay Wagner who was all over the Judith Kranz miniseries.
Lindsay
Uh,
Wagner, Cheryl Ladd,
Sarah Ladd,
Jacqueline Smith was
Jacqueline
the
Smith,
major
even
queen of miniseries.
even
But let's
Valerie
be fair to
Bertinelli,
those
Valerie
women.
Bertinelli,
you
for better
know,
or for worse, because she was not good in these
Yeah,
things. Oh my
she
god.
wasn't good, and she didn't really keep her. She struggled with her weight, but Lindsay Wagner, those Cheryl Ladd, those women kept their looks,
Yes.
and they were still very striking. Where they would be considered too old for film, they
right.
were right on time for television.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll say in Valerie's defense, she was in an excellent miniseries called In a Child's Name,
Oh yes, that was
and she's
scary.
and she's great in that. Um and and that was a very upset, based on a true story,
Yeah, that
very
was scary.
upsetting miniseries about she just very quickly she her character, her sister marries a dentist played by Michael Onkeen, who is abusive and then ends up murdering her. And the majority of the miniseries is about the fight between her family and his parents over their child.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and there's a scene that stands out in my mind to this day. First of all, it's an early role for Chris Maloney, who plays Valerie Bertinelli's husband. And this is way before Oz, way before Law and Orders. He was already balding, but had kind of long hair.
Mm-hmm.
But has always been in shape, always. But there's a scene where his parents are staying at the home that they shared, and
Oh yes.
do you know what I'm talking about? And
Yes.
his mother is played by Louise Fletcher from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. But anyway, there's a scene where they're in bed in the bedroom that used to be the couple's bedroom, and the police have been over the house, right? Searching for evidence. The couple goes to they go to get in bed, his parents get in the bed, and they turn off the light, and the
Mm-hmm.
entire room lights up with luminol from blood spatter
Mm.
that has been all over the bedroom that you would never see with the lights on, because it's been painted and all of that, but it just lights up the entire room. And it's just to this day it's still a really creepy scene. um and so that was actually a really good miniseries, and much in that vein of as Doc Tracy was talking about earlier, the true crime miniseries. That was a good one, and
And a queer
Valerie did herself proud in that one.
and the queer cinema connection to that is Michael Keaton is in that, and he was the uh husband, I believe, in Making Love, the one that was
Making Love,
he
yeah.
was.
Hmm.
Well, I don't remember. Was Harry Hamlin the
Yeah,
enticer, or was it the other way
yeah, it was
around?
Harry. Yeah, it was Harry Hamlin.
Okay, yeah. Well, Michael on Keaton, I was like, "Woo, child." Mm.
You know what was
Ain't
also
nothing
interesting is
like ain't nothing like those 70s, 80s white leading men. They were hot. Like Peter Strauss and Nick Nolte. Oh my God, Nick Nolte pre-cocaine and alcohol. Oh my goodness. Woo! Woo! Hot.
Oh, you're killing me.
so.
Hot.
I mean, one of the things that's also interesting is having watched a ton of them in the last, again, in the last 3 or 4 years, was that there was always these kind of villains that were crazy people or stalkers that were on the outskirts of the story, always being threaded throughout the story, that were um, looking to kill or murder, take down, destroy the the protagonist of the piece in all of these stories that were very trope heavy with that. Jackie Collins was notorious for it in her stories, having some crazy person looking to destroy um, the protagonist, either for some perceived slight or out of obsession, or just that they were a crazy person who became obsessed.
If I
Um,
can't have her, nobody can.
right, right, right. So these stories would definitely have their tropes with them. And I think over time, as y'all have pointed out, the audiences got tired of them. um I also think it was a huge ask, 30 hours of Warren Remembrance in 1989. I don't know that anybody cared enough, especially since it was a part two, so they had already kind of covered the war. And, 6 years earlier, I don't know that anybody really wanted to see
Well, it
that many
varied so
hours.
few people of color. We might have gave you one series, but we wasn't gonna give you 30 hours of whiteness. And you know, and they, you forgot that. But I wanted to bring up one where you guys triggered it with HBO of the black ones we forgot, which was excellent. If people have never seen it, should go see it. Is The Corner.
Oh
Oh my
yes,
gosh, yes.
yes, which
Yeah.
was the precursor to The Wire. It's a
Yes.
David
Right.
Simon. It's a David Simon
Yeah.
thing with Charles Dutton, and the little boy from, well, he's not little anymore, but at the time he was little boy from Fresh, the movie Fresh.
Yep.
Uh,
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, but it's Candy Alexander who
Candy
can't.
Alexander.
yes,
Yes.
Candy Alex,
Under underrated.
everybody, her
Underrated.
scenes. I literally bought The Corner just for the Candy Alexander scenes, right? Like,
Yes.
she. I mean, and I love David Simon for continuing to keep her employed, because he put her in Treme, so she could continue to shine for several more seasons. He was excellent in Treme as well.
Yep.
Even though the show was kind of a snooze, but she's never a snooze. But yes, The Corner is definitely, and that's an HBO show. Again,
Yeah.
HBO being the prestige place to be. Any closing remarks on the mini series of the 70s and 80s?
Well,
I
Any
just
we did the
recommendations?
90s. We did the 90s too, didn't we?
We did a little bit of the 90s. I
Okay.
mean, really, you know, by 89, after 89, after ABC lost their shirt, it was miniseries with a small M, not miniseries with
Well, all I'm just gonna say is the House of Cards miniseries. You need to see that first series before you tell me anything about the in Netflix one. That's all I'm gonna say. Go back
Oh,
and
you mean
treat
the
yourself.
original British one? You're talking about the
Yes,
UK
the
one?
original House
Yes,
of Cards. The
well,
the
it's
first segment, because it gets a little weaker after that, but that first 4 episode miniseries, The House of Cards. Because see, the difference between us and the Brits, if it didn't do well, they ain't making the next one. That's just it. Find something else to do.
That's true.
yes.
That was it. We made this. That was it.
It
And
was good though. I've seen it. I've seen the British version of it. I
yeah.
actually saw the British version before I saw the American version.
Well, I just like that Ian Richardson is just I just think the difference between prestige actors is the difference between them and film and TV. It's the part.
Right.
You know, if it had been a TV movie, he'd have killed it. If it's a big screen movie, he'd have killed it. Same stuff. Americans really differentiate.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I mean, because I
Yeah.
think if you think about UK television in general, there's a ton of art house stars in those films. I mean, in those television shows, and it's not kind of done in a stunt casting, fantasy island love boat kind of
Yeah.
way, right? You know,
Yeah. Shoot, Lord
um,
have mercy. And if you could find the original Widows, it is so good.
yeah, I got to check that out. I don't know that I might have
It's
seen it at
hard
the
to
time.
find.
Um, but I was just gonna say for folks who might have heard you talk about Tinker, was it Tinker Taper
Tinker,
Tinker?
Tinker
Tinker,
Tailor
Tailor,
Soldier
Sailor.
Spies.
Yeah,
Yes.
they made that into a Academy Award nominated film with Gary Oldman more recently,
Yeah, and
uh,
Benedict Cumberbatch.
and Benedict Cumberbatch, right?
The film is great, but like I said, it's one of my calming things too. I'll watch both of them back to back because it's and then I'll watch Smiley's People, which is the
Oh yeah.
follow up.
Oh, Alec
And
Guinness is so good in that. Oh my
yeah,
goodness.
it's not
Whew.
as strong of a story the way they presented it, but Alec
Right.
Guinness
But his
just makes it.
performance,
Yeah,
he's all that.
yeah, he's the man.
Yeah, the Brits will go
Um,
back. I mean, because they've also redone Howard's Inn as a miniseries.
Mhm.
Yeah, they'll redo some things.
yeah, right, right. We ought to leave certain things. Like we should have left the girl with the dragon tattoo alone. Um,
I didn't hate the American version. I love the original version, but I didn't hate the
yeah.
American version.
I'm sorry, Daniel Craig is hard for me to look at sometimes when he's supposedly a love interest because he's got that hang doggy face. He's got a great body, but it's that Curious George face and those teacup handle ears. It's like,
Oh
baby,
my
Oh my
gosh.
it's
god!
not
I
sexy.
Duck,
cannot! I
Duck
cannot!
Tracy, Duck Tracy.
I
Sorry,
am the. Whew.
sorry.
Do you have anything to wrap us up, Adrian, before I close us out officially for the night?
Um, just that I would, if I'm making recommendations, obviously you have to take some of these with a grain of salt given the time that they were made. And it can be very easy to lose sight of um, trying to situate yourself in context when you're watching them. I mean, it can be distracting, admittedly, when you see some of these, what were for the time all star casts of people, oftentimes people actors who were known maybe for more light roles or comedic roles trying to the miniseries also gave them an opportunity to try to do more dramatic turns and so you'll see a stage trained Shakespearean actor like Robert Reed for example in Roots or and you see your Ed Asners and people like that and so, if you can kind of situate yourself into the context of the time, you can appreciate those performances and not associate them so strongly with whatever their most famous television role was. Um, but I tend to gravitate. I definitely enjoyed the Sudsy Fair from that time, but for me, if I'm going back to watch some of those older miniseries, I'm going more likely to the darker stuff. So, like I said, I mentioned things like Helter Skelter, which aired over 2 nights, so it was a miniseries. Or the Guyana Tragedy, Fatal Vision is there's been a lot uh, raised about the questionable tactics and ethics of Joe McGinnis, who is the author of the book Fatal Vision, on which that miniseries is based. A lot of his journalistic practices have been called into question since that time, but just as a pure, um, you know, entertainment product. It's really really excellent. And Gary Cole is amazing, and
Hmm.
he's such a versatile actor, but he's really known these days a lot for his comedic turns, and shows like Veep, movies like Office Space, things like that. And so this is a chance to go back and really see him really dig into a very difficult dramatic role, because the character that he plays is very opaque in a lot of ways, and hard to get a handle on, and he really adds a great deal of nuance and power you know to this role. So those are some that I would definitely recommend if people want to go back and visit. And just real quickly, since we've talked quite a bit about some UK miniseries. One that I definitely recommend to anyone. This is where I fell in love with the actor Mark Strong, who is one of my favorite actors. He's in everything. So
Literally,
if you think you don't know who he is, trust me, you do.
you
Um,
absolutely do.
but
He's in Tinker Tailor. He's in the
yeah,
movie.
yes.
Uh,
But I first discovered him in a miniseries that he was in called The Long Firm.
yes.
And oh, it's so good.
Highly
It's
recommended
so
book too.
yes. It's a 4-part series, and it's about uh a basically a gang lord in London, and who was associated with the Cray brothers, which many people have probably heard of. Tom Hardy played both brothers in a film a few years back, and they were very well known London gangsters. And Mark Strong plays a character named Harry Starks, who is a mobster and club owner in that period. He's also gay, and
Loves Judy
as
Garland.
as as the Cray brothers were, or at least
One of them.
one of them was. The other, there's many people believe that the other twin was at least bisexual, but nevertheless, this was really a groundbreaking portrayal at that time, of playing that kind of seedy London underworld tough guy. I mean, this guy is a gangster. He's very dangerous. He's a murderer. But he's also uh, he also has a sexuality and orientation that he doesn't bother to hide, despite the risks to him for that. He's very much about uh, you know fully embodying who he is, and in that environment. And Mark Strong's performance is just incredible. And I've watched everything that I could get my hands on that he did from that point on, and the miniseries is that good. So
Yeah, I feel like we should probably wait till next season to do a whole separate episode on the UK stuff, because as we're all aficionados and there's tons and tons of content there for us to cover. Uh, I will say he Mark Strong is also, for those who are theater nerds, brilliant in a National Theater Live production that is available as a pro shop production of Arthur Miller's A View from the Bridge,
yes.
Mm.
uh, which he electrifying in. Just truly choose the scenery. Uh,
Can I share one last thing about context of watching these old ones too?
sure.
Um, Remember, these were events. This is something that has been lost with the creation of cable and the furthering of technology, that these were events. Families sat down to watch them, regardless of the content. Girlfriends, college students, men, even though they would say, I don't watch that. You watched Lace, because men can tell you more
Thank
about
you.
it,
Yes, they did.
and so this phenomenon, it's like, I was not a Shondaland fan, but I lost all my friends on Shondaland nights. But I didn't really have to watch, because if I watched my Facebook feed or my Twitter, y'all were doing. And the other thing is like reality TV. You guys, the reality TV shows that are the Real Housewives and the Love Is Blind. Y'all lose your friends when those are on because it's a phenomenon. And so I would remind people that if these things seem over the top or old fashioned, remember millions of people were watching these, and this was what was discussed at work and in the dorm room and at school the next day. um, which was a uniqueness to this kind of miniseries, was this word of mouth. And you were out of the loop, particularly as a kid, if you got banished by your parents from seeing some of these things, particularly the more racy, salacious ones, if you couldn't see it, because that Lindsay Wagner one, that Judah Krantz, that was like, oh my God, your mama had read that book, so she was like, oh my, so you had to do some serious sneaking, or the fact
Yeah.
that you knew how to work the VCR helped out, because you could, record it and then sneak and watch it later. But these were phenomenon, so I wouldn't forget that.
No, thank you for that additional context. I wanted to make a correction. I said Joan Collins and um, Monaco in this Monte Carlo is with George Harrison as her love interest, always tan. Um, and what was the other thing that uh, some black stuff that we didn't get a chance to cover in the more prestige realm. Barry Jenkins' most recent foray into the limited series space with Underground Railroad.
Underground Railroad, yeah.
People, even if you say I don't ever want to see a slave thing, this is not that. Watch it. It is a different exploration of in an alternate universe kind of a sick experience. It's not what you're thinking. Um, Similarly, Book of Negroes was also really good. So there have been other kind of more recent black prestige ones. The Porter, um,
And I guess Lovecraft Country is a limited
Lovecraft,
series.
yeah. Now Watchmen and Lovecraft Country will both, since they only got one season, will both
Right.
be considered limited series.
But
So
Watchmen was intentionally one. There was never an
yeah,
intent to do more than one. But Regina King could be miniseries mama if people would figure it out. I think she would be so good at that.
yeah. So I just wanted to make sure folks were aware of some, that there are some black ones out there that are more current. Them,
Yeah,
was it them or they? I think it's them.
it's them.
The Amazon Prime one. So there's usually increasingly more in the horror space, in the Afrofuturistic space. Uh, the other thing I wanted to point out is we didn't go into great detail about Roots, but Roots holds up despite the really bad makeup from the era makeup and wigs of their time. This was the best that we had to offer in '77. People, this
Right.
not judge,
O.J.
but
Simpson's cornrows.
but the storyline itself, you would actually be surprised that I mean, philosophically, what each night brought was some really high, talk about some critical race theory, like it's some really high level discussions of race and oppression, beyond just teaching about slavery. A lot of the things around colorism, and such, were explored in really high level detail that you would be hard pressed to find on TV today as well done.
Yes.
And I did enjoy the remake of Roots, because it did spend more time in Africa
Hmm.
than the original one did. Um, but yeah, like we can't,
Could we speak to, since he was in the news for something sad of being abused, the great John Amos in
Oh,
yes,
Roots playing
yes.
the older Kunta Kinte. Like I said, I think one of the most powerful scenes for me in that Roots is when Kizzy is sold and he picks up the dirt and his wife is pissed and going, "What are you doing?" And it says, "Well, in my country, if you collect the footsteps, they'll come back to you." And of course, in the era of slavery, we know that's probably not going to happen. And it's the wife walking away from him while he's holding that dirt in his hands, and the grains of it is going through his hands. Um, is one of the most powerful things about selling away loved ones during slavery.
No,
But
I
John
mean,
Amos
and
doesn't get enough credit.
no, he doesn't. And in was it the American Archives of Television? All of the people who were involved in Roots all say to this day, people who have been involved in other amazing projects and productions in the years since have all said that that was the work that they're most proud of having been part of and contributed to.
Right.
And it's not lost that what helped kick off in a real way a boom of television for white folks started out based on black success and
Mm,
black stories,
right.
Mm.
but did not get to see the fruits of that for most of the next decade.
Yeah.
Um,
But
so
and if anything, we were talking about being able to contextualize these projects and appreciate them for what they were at the time in which they were made. And one of the things that I would say about Roots is not only does it hold up in terms of narrative, in terms of philosophy, in terms of intellectual labor that is actually conveyed through the storytelling, as well as emotion and pathos and all of those things that you look for in television. There's as LMG said, there's a great critique and a great depth to it, but also just a chance to appreciate some really great actors, particularly obviously really great black actors who we don't want to make sure are not lost to later generations. You've got your not just the people you would think of the obviously LeVar Burton, as we were talking, John Amos, Cicely Tyson, but also people who have already passed on, and or who fell out of who didn't work as frequently and fell out of the industry. People like the great Madge
Matt
Sinclair
Sinclair.
was always one of my favorite actresses.
Yes.
Leslie Uggams, who's
Or the best spitting in the cup of the racist white
yes.
woman ever.
And who is also, I keep going back to this, but it's because there's such a crossover in the cast list. She is the star of Backstairs at the White House. Um,
Mhm.
and then you've got your Richard Roundtree, you've got Lynn Moody,
Lynn
Scatman
Moody.
Crothers, Moses Gunn. I mean, Lou Gossett Jr. obviously. I mean, and then not to this is the saga of an American family. So I want to the focus should be primarily on the black actors, but the story is not what it is without the cast. And there's amazing, kind of some classic Hollywood white actors as well, from Lloyd Bridges to Lorne Green, Burl Ives, an early role for Ian McShane, many, many, many years before Deadwood. Um,
Ben Vereen.
your favorite Brad Davis, Ben Vereen. Yeah, Carolyn Jones. I mean, Morticia Adams herself is in this. So it's just a pleasure garden, in a lot of ways. It's a deeply painful story. It's a deeply resonant story, but it's also a very joyous story. And it's a hopeful story. And it's one and it was revolutionary in so many ways. And so, yeah, maybe if nothing else, we wrap up by saying if you've never seen the original Roots, go back and watch it.
I would say go back and watch it, even if you saw it a lot as a kid,
Well, true,
because
because
I
it
pro
holds up, as you said.
yeah, because I mean, it was on TV every year as a child, and it didn't hit the same way it hit watching it again as an adult, and being really surprised at how intellectually rigorous it was,
Right. Yeah.
um, and how
And
much
the
it.
other thing I would say to rewatching it is you can recognize in modern films the people who've been watching it, because particularly Quentin Tarantino, and this is a whole nother podcast, is the biggest thief of film culture. Because in Django, where you have Jamie Foxx in the ridiculous blue outfit, and he decides he's gonna whip the overseer, and he says, y'all niggas want to see something? That is a complete reference to when LeVar Burton is forced to give up his name. If you look at the scening and the framing, it is the same. And he has seen everything. And I always think he should get an asterisk. He's brilliant, but I don't think the man's had an original idea in his life.
He's a remixer.
Yes, he
I was
is.
gonna say, I'm not even gonna go with brilliant. I'm not even gonna.
He's a remixer.
There are things like Inglourious Basterds, which is really good. So
Well, yeah,
when he's good, he's good.
I'm not
That's brilliant.
I'm not going to pretend like I haven't liked any of his films.
Right.
But I've always felt that he was very overrated. He's mostly honest about the fact that he's basically just a video store kid who was able to get the opportunity to start putting all those influences on film. He's honest about that for the most part, so I'll give him that. And I'm not saying he doesn't do what he does well. I think I haven't seen the last film of his that I've seen was The Hateful Eight. Okay. So yeah. I
don't like messing with that Manson stuff. I'm eventually gonna get to it, but that
Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Yeah, that bothers me. And then I don't like he tried to mess with the mythology of Bruce Lee.
About Bruce Lee, yeah. That's part of my issue. Yeah, but I just I mean, I certainly am not, the subject matter doesn't bother me. He bothers me. So
but the classic line from Roots is grits, dummy. And and how that became the middle school insult. It just yeah, thank you, L. Michael. I am going to do that. I got a long ass plane flight coming, and maybe watching that might be the thing.
I will say for a lot of the ones that are less rigorous, for lack of a better word, than Roots, and is that a lot of this stuff is also really good background just television for when you're working, because for the most part, a lot of it doesn't require your full attention.
Right.
So for those of you who maybe never seen some of these things, the ones that you probably will, attention must be paid: Thornbirds, Lace, Roots, Shogun. Those are more of the exceptions to the rule, which is why they stand out north and south. But there were tons of these things that you could just throw on in the background and get a ton of work done and get through 4 episodes in a day. So anyway, with that
if you're into sci-fi, watch V.
Yes, if you're into sci-fi, watch V. And
give it grace for the special effects.
I was just gonna say, but you gotta give grace to those practical effects from the 1980s. This is the Gipson Gazette signing off as we wonder, what are the stories you're telling the world? Better still, what are the stories you're telling yourselves? Good night.
Night.
Good night.